The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sprawling suburbs of Southern California. Elena Carter navigated her blue SUV along a quiet stretch of Route 66, the road lined with swaying palm trees, neatly trimmed hedges, and the occasional pastel-colored bungalow. At 32, Elena was a senior investigator for a federal law enforcement agency based in San Bernardino, a role that demanded unrelenting focus, meticulous attention to detail, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. Her days were a blur of case files, undercover operations, and high-stakes briefings, but tonight, she craved the simple comfort of her riverside home. She pictured herself kicking off her worn boots, reheating leftover tacos from her favorite taqueria, and sinking into her couch with a true crime podcast. The thought brought a faint smile to her lips. Elena kept her speed steady at 40 mph, well within the limit, her blinker clicking rhythmically with every turn. Her SUV, a practical vehicle she'd chosen for its reliability, was spotless washed and waxed just last weekend. She drove with the precision of someone who knew the rules and followed them, a habit forged not just by her training, but by years of navigating life as a black woman in America. Elena understood the law better than most, but she also knew it didn't always protect everyone equally. The road was familiar, just a few miles from her modest two-bedroom house, where her cat, Luna, was likely waiting by the window for her return. Red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, shattering her quiet anticipation. A police siren gave a sharp wail, signaling her to pull over. Elena's jaw tightened, not from fear, but from a deep, familiar frustration. She hadn't swerved, hadn't sped, hadn't given any reason for a stop. Her mind raced through the last few minutes, every turn signaled, every lane change deliberate. With a slow, controlled breath, she eased the SUV onto the gravel shoulder, the crunch of pebbles under her tires loud in the evening stillness. She flicked on her interior light, placed both hands on the wheel, and sat upright, her posture a silent declaration of compliance. It was a ritual she'd learned early, one that carried the weight of survival. A young white officer, no older than his mid-20s, approached her window, his flashlight already beaming into the car. His badge read, Officer Daniel Pierce. His face was stiff, his eyes narrowing as he tapped on the glass with a knuckle. Elena lowered the window, her voice calm but firm. Good evening, officer. Can I help you? Pierce tilted his head, studying her for a moment too long, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin prickle. License and registration, he said flatly, skipping any pretense of courtesy. Elena kept her tone even, her hands still on the wheel. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? Pierce shrugged, the flashlight unwavering in her face, its glare forcing her to squint. Your car caught my eye. Just need to check things out. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she held her ground. Caught your eye, officer? I was driving the speed limit, signaled every turn. I'd like to know what I did wrong. Pierce's posture stiffened, his voice taking on a sharp edge. Look, I don't need a reason to check your papers. Hand them over, and let's make this quick. Elena's fingers tightened on the wheel, but she kept her composure. She knew her rights, had memorized the statutes, and had trained agents on de-escalation tactics. This wasn't just a routine stop, it felt personal, and she wasn't about to let it slide without a clear answer. Officer Pierce, she said, reading his badge again. I know my rights. The law requires a valid reason for a stop. Caught your eye doesn't qualify. Can you tell me what I did wrong, or is this something else? Pierce stepped closer, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. He leaned down, his face inches from the open window, the flashlight still glaring. You're not in charge here, he snapped, his voice low and biting. I'm the one asking questions. You don't get to lecture me about the law. His hand slapped the car door, the sound sharp in the quiet night, making Elena's shoulders tense for a split second before she steadied herself. She met his gaze, unflinching, her dark eyes steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. I'm not lecturing, officer, she said. I'm asking you to follow the rules you're supposed to uphold. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm happy to cooperate if you give me a real reason. Pierce's face reddened, his patience visibly fraying. You think you're smart, huh? I've been doing this job for years, and I don't need some driver telling me how to do it. He pointed a finger at her, his voice rising. Hand over those papers now, or I'll pull you out of that car myself. Elena's chest tightened, not from his threat, but from the weight of what was unfolding. This wasn't about a traffic violation. It was about power, about her being a black woman in a nice SUV on a suburban road. She'd grown up hearing stories like this from her father, a retired mechanic who'd faced his own share of baseless stops. She'd read case files, analyzed patterns of racial profiling, and even counseled colleagues on navigating bias. But living it was different, raw, visceral, and infuriating. "Officer," she said, her tone unwavering, "I'm not resisting. I'm asking for fairness. If you can't provide a reason, you're overstepping. That's not just my opinion, that's the law." Pierce scoffed, stepping back but keeping his hand near his belt. "Fairness? You don't get to decide what's fair. Keep talking like that, and you'll see what happens." The threat hung heavy, the tension thickening as cars passed by, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene before fading into the night. Elena knew this moment was a turning point. She could comply quietly, hand over her documents, and hope to drive away. Or she could stand her ground, knowing the risks but refusing to be silenced. She chose the latter, her resolve as solid as the badge she carried in her office, ready to face whatever came next. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. The California night was dark now, the suburban streetlights casting long, flickering shadows across Route 66. Officer Daniel Pierce loomed outside her window, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a challenge. The air crackled with tension, his last words, "Keep talking like that, and you'll see what happens," echoing in her ears. At 32, Elena was no stranger to pressure. As a senior investigator, she'd faced armed suspects, coordinated sting operations, and testified in federal courtrooms. But here, just miles from her Riverside home, this wasn't about her title. It was about surviving an encounter that felt all too familiar to black women in America. She kept her voice calm, her eyes locked on Pierce's. "Officer, I'm asking for a reason for this stop. That's my right. If you can't give one, this is unlawful, and I won't comply with unlawful orders." Pierce's face twisted, his patience evaporating. He took a step closer, his boots grinding against the gravel. "You don't get to tell me what's lawful," he barked, his voice carrying over the hum of distant traffic. "I'm giving you one last chance. Hand over those papers, or you're getting out of this car, one way or another." His hand hovered near his belt, fingers twitching, and Elena's heart skipped a beat. She recognized that move from training videos and incident reports, a prelude to escalation. This wasn't just a power play anymore, it was dangerous. She took a slow, deliberate breath, keeping her hands visible on the wheel. "I'm not resisting, Officer Pierce," she said, each word measured. "I'm cooperating within the law. You're escalating this for no reason, and I'm telling you now, I'm recording every second of this." She nodded toward her phone, mounted on the dashboard, its tiny red light blinking as it captured the scene. Pierce's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to her, his scowl deepening. "You think a camera scares me?" he snapped, but his voice wavered, betraying a hint of unease. "I'm in charge here, not you. Get out of the car now." He rapped his knuckles hard on the doorframe, the sound piercing the quiet night. Elena didn't budge. "I'm not leaving this car without a valid reason," she said, her tone steady as steel. "I don't feel safe, and I don't trust your intentions. You've given me no cause for this stop, and now you're threatening me. That's not how this works." Her years in law enforcement had honed her ability to read people, and Pierce's body language, tight shoulders, clenched jaw, the slight tremor in his hand screamed trouble. She wasn't just protecting her rights, she was protecting her life. Pierce's hand dropped to his holster, and in one swift motion, he drew his gun, pointing it through the open window. The barrel glinted under the streetlight, aimed directly at her chest. "I said get out!" he shouted, his voice raw with anger. "You don't call the shots here." Elena's breath caught, her heart pounding, but she forced herself to stay calm. Her training kicked in, stay focused, don't flinch, don't give him an excuse. "Officer," she said, her voice low but unshaken, "you're breaking the law. Put that gun down. You have no justification for this." Her eyes never left his, even as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She felt the danger, the razor-thin line between control and chaos, but she refused to let fear take over. Pierce's grip on the gun tightened, his face a mix of rage and defiance. "Don't play smart with me," he growled. "You think you're above the law? Move, or I'll make you." Elena kept her hands on the wheel, palms up to show she wasn't a threat. "I'm a law-abiding citizen," she said, "and I'm not the one breaking the law. Here you are. Lower your weapon, or you'll face the consequences." She spoke with the authority of someone who'd spent years upholding justice, but inside, she was calculating every word, every move. One wrong step could end this badly. Pierce laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the stillness. "Consequences? You've got no power here. I'm the one with the badge." But his eyes darted to the phone again, the red light still blinking, and Elena saw a flicker of doubt. She seized the moment. "I'm making a call," she said, moving her hands slowly, deliberately to the phone, letting him see every motion. "You can't stop me from contacting your superior." Pierce's gun stayed up, but he didn't interrupt as she tapped the screen and dialed. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Sheriff's office, Captain Torres." Elena kept her eyes on Pierce, her voice clear and firm. "This is Elena Carter, senior investigator with the Federal Law Enforcement Agency in San Bernardino. I'm on Route 66, pulled over by Officer Daniel Pierce for no reason. He's pointing a gun at me, threatening me without cause. I'm recording everything, and I need you here now to handle this." Pierce froze, the gun still in his hand, but his face shifted shock, then panic. He hadn't caught her name before, hadn't realized who she was. "You're what?" he stammered, the barrel dipping slightly. Elena didn't waver. "You heard me, officer. I'm a federal investigator. You've made a serious mistake, and it's all on camera." She set the phone back on the mount, the call still connected, Torres's voice crackling through, asking for her exact location. She gave it mile marker 8, just past the diner, her tone as steady as if she were briefing agents. Pierce's hand shook, the gun lowering an inch, but he didn't holster it. "You're lying," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You can't be." "I'm not lying," Elena said, her voice cutting through his doubt. "And you're out of time. Put the gun down before this gets worse." The distant wail of a siren broke the silence, growing louder, and Elena knew help was coming. But she also knew this wasn't over. Pierce's next move would decide how this night ended, and she was ready for whatever came. Elena sat rigid in her blue SUV, the dashboard's soft glow the only light inside as the California night pressed in. Officer Daniel Pierce stood frozen outside her window, his gun still in hand, though it wavered now, no longer aimed directly at her. The red light of her phone's camera blinked steadily, capturing every second of the standoff on Route 66, just miles from Elena's Riverside home. Her call to Captain Torres had shaken Pierce. His face was pale, his eyes darting between her and the road where the siren's wail grew louder. At 32, Elena was no stranger to high-stakes encounters. She'd faced danger in undercover operations, negotiated with hostile suspects, and led teams through chaotic crime scenes. But this was different. It wasn't just an abuse of power, it was personal, a stark reminder of the prejudice she'd navigated since childhood. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Compton, Elena had learned early to carry herself with quiet strength, to anticipate the assumptions others might make about her. Her parents, her father a mechanic, her mother a schoolteacher, had instilled in her a fierce sense of dignity and a belief that knowledge was power. That belief had carried her through college, through law enforcement training, and into a career where she'd earned respect through grit and competence. But here, on this quiet road, none of that seemed to matter to Pierce. She kept her hands on the wheel, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Officer Pierce," she said, "I told you to lower your weapon. You're making this worse for yourself." Pierce's grip tightened on the gun, but doubt clouded his expression. "You can't be a Fed," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're just trying to scare me." His voice lacked the bite it had before, and Elena saw the crack in his confidence. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I'm not trying anything," she said firmly. "I'm Elena Carter, senior investigator. You pulled me over for no reason, threatened me, and now you're pointing a gun at me. It's all recorded. You need to stop this now." Her words were clear, calm, honed from years of commanding respect in tense situations. But as a black woman, she knew this moment wasn't just about her title. It was about surviving an encounter rooted in something uglier than a traffic stop. Before Pierce could respond, headlights swept across the scene, and a black and white SUV screeched to a stop behind his patrol car. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform stepped out, his boots heavy on the gravel. Captain Mateo Torres, his badge glinting under the streetlight, strode forward, his face hard as he took in the sight. Pierce with a drawn gun, Elena sitting composed but tense. "Pierce!" Torres barked, his voice cutting through the night. "Holster that weapon, right now." "What in God's name are you doing?" Pierce jolted, lowering the gun to his side, then fumbling it back into his holster. "Sir, she wouldn't cooperate," he stammered, his earlier bravado gone. "I told her to get out of the car, but she kept arguing, recording me, threatening me with some federal story." Torres held up a hand, silencing him. He turned to Elena, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but in recognition. "Ma'am, are you Elena Carter?" Elena nodded, her posture straight, her voice even. "Yes, sir. Senior Investigator, San Bernardino office. I was driving home when Officer Pierce stopped me. I asked for a reason multiple times. He gave none, then threatened me, insulted me, and pulled his gun when I wouldn't comply with an unlawful order. It's all on my phone." She gestured to the device, still recording. Torres's face darkened as he turned back to Pierce, who was visibly shrinking. "You pulled a gun on a federal investigator? For what, a bad feeling?" His voice was low, furious. "Give me your weapon, Pierce. Now." Pierce hesitated, then unclipped his holster and handed over the gun, his hands shaking. "I didn't know who she was, sir," he mumbled. "She didn't say—" "Didn't say," Elena cut in, her tone sharp but controlled. "I told you my rights. I asked for a reason. You didn't care. You assumed I was someone you could bully. This isn't about who I am. It's about what you did." She looked at Torres. "Captain, I want this handled by the book. Not because I'm a Fed, but because no one Fed or not deserves to be treated like this." Torres nodded, his jaw tight. "You have my word, Ms. Carter. This won't be swept under the rug." He waved over two officers from the SUV who'd been watching silently. "Take Pierce to the car. He's suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." The officers stepped forward, one guiding Pierce by the arm. He didn't resist, but his face twisted with a mix of fear and defiance as he was led away. Elena exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She met Torres's gaze. "I'll send you the video," she said. "I want transparency, Captain. This could have been anyone, a teacher, a nurse, a kid driving home. That's why this matters." Torres rubbed his forehead, clearly rattled. "I understand, ma'am. I'm sorry this happened. We'll get to the bottom of it." He paused, then added, "Can you step out, just to wrap this up safely?" Elena agreed, opening her door and standing tall. Her training kept her composed, but she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was standing for everyone who'd faced a badge used as a weapon. Pierce's mistake would cost him, but Elena knew the real work was bigger than one night, one officer. Elena drove away from the gravel shoulder of Route 66, her blue SUV humming softly as the California night swallowed the flashing lights of the police cars behind her. The encounter with Officer Daniel Pierce, his gun, his threats, his refusal to give a reason for stopping her, lingered like a weight in her chest. She thought of her parents, who'd taught her to hold her head high, and of her younger brother, Jamal, who'd once been stopped and searched for looking suspicious while walking home from school. At 32, Elena had faced danger before, but this was different. It wasn't just an abuse of power, it was personal, a reminder of the prejudice she'd navigated her whole life as a black woman in America. Just miles from her Riverside home, she'd stood her ground, recorded the truth, and called in Captain Torres. Pierce was suspended, his gun taken, but Elena knew this wasn't the end. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone judged by the wrong eyes at the wrong time. By morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Captain Torres launched an internal investigation before Elena even reached her office in San Bernardino. She uploaded the video from her phone to the sheriff's department, ensuring every frame was preserved Pierce's hostile demands, his vague, "Your car looked out of place," his hand slamming her door, his gun pointed at her chest. The footage was stark, undeniable, and Torres promised it would be reviewed by the county's oversight board. Elena didn't stop there. She filed a formal complaint, meticulously detailing every word, every action, knowing the system only worked if you held it accountable. Her training had taught her that justice wasn't automatic, it was earned through persistence. Word got out fast. Local news stations in Riverside picked up the story by noon, running headlines like "Federal Investigator Targeted in Traffic Stop Gone Wrong." Social media platforms buzzed with posts, some naming Pierce and demanding his badge, others sharing personal stories of unfair stops. Elena stayed off her phone, focusing instead on a meeting with her team where they were planning a major operation to dismantle a trafficking ring. But the weight of the night before followed her. Colleagues offered quiet support in the hallways, their glances conveying solidarity. They knew this wasn't just about a bad cop, it was about a system that too often let bad cops thrive. Elena's office was a small, organized space cluttered with case files, a photo of her parents at their 35th anniversary, and a framed quote from Maya Angelou: "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated." She sat at her desk, reviewing surveillance reports, but her mind drifted to the stop. She thought of her mentor, a retired agent who'd warned her early in her career: "You'll face moments where your badge won't protect you. Stay sharp, stay calm, and document everything." That advice had saved her last night. She opened her laptop and drafted an email to her team, not about the case, but about resilience. "We don't just enforce the law, we live it. When it's tested, we stand firm." She hit send, then turned back to her work, determined to keep moving forward. Weeks later, the investigation concluded, and the findings were unequivocal. Pierce had no legal basis for the stop-no-traffic violation, no warrant, nothing but his own bias. The report cited clear evidence of misconduct: his threats, his drawn weapon, his refusal to justify his actions. The oversight board recommended charges, and the case moved to court. Elena wasn't surprised, but she wasn't relieved either. Justice wasn't a verdict, it was what came after, the ripple effects that could change lives. The trial began in a packed Riverside courthouse, just miles from where the incident occurred. Reporters crowded the steps outside, cameras flashing as Elena arrived. She wore a charcoal suit, her hair pulled into a sleek bun, her expression calm but resolute. Inside, the courtroom was a mosaic of faces: locals, activists, police officers, some in uniform, others off-duty, watching silently. Pierce sat at the defense table, his face pale and drawn, his lawyer arguing he'd acted under stress, misjudged the situation. But the video, played on a large screen, told a different story. The jury watched Pierce's flashlight glare into Elena's face, heard his shout, "You don't call the shots," saw his gun aimed at her chest. Gasps rippled through the room when Elena's voice, steady and clear, revealed she was a federal investigator. On the witness stand, Elena was unshakable. She described the stop in vivid detail, driving 40 mph, signaling every turn, doing nothing wrong. She recounted Pierce's hostility, his insults, the moment his hand went to his gun. "He didn't stop me because of a law I broke," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "He stopped me because of who he thought I was, someone he could control. That's not just wrong, it's dangerous. It erodes trust in the system we all rely on." The jury leaned forward, some nodding, others scribbling notes. Pierce's lawyer tried to rattle her, suggesting she provoked him by not complying, but Elena's responses were airtight. "I know the law," she said. "I asked for a reason. He gave me none. That's not provocation, that's my right." The prosecution called additional witnesses, including Captain Torres, who testified about Pierce's history of complaints, minor infractions, but a pattern of aggressive behavior. A forensic analyst confirmed the video's authenticity, noting it hadn't been altered. Elena's neighbor, a retired librarian who'd driven by during the stop, took the stand, her voice trembling as she described seeing Pierce's gun and Elena's calm defiance. "I was scared for her," the woman said. "She didn't deserve that." Pierce's defense was weak, relying on his claim of split-second decision-making under pressure, but the jury wasn't swayed. After days of testimony, they deliberated for 6 hours. The courtroom was tense when they returned, the judge's gavel silencing whispers. Pierce was found guilty of abuse of power, endangering a citizen, and racial bias in violation of department policy. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison, no parole, and a permanent ban from law enforcement. Pierce stood, head bowed, as bailiffs cuffed him. The room erupted in murmurs, some clapping, others shaking their heads. Elena sat still, her face unreadable. It wasn't victory she felt, it was resolve. One officer down didn't fix the system, but it was a start. Outside, Elena faced a sea of microphones. News vans lined the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions. She took a breath, her voice steady. "This isn't about me," she said. "I'm a federal investigator, but I could have been anyone, a teacher, a parent, a student. This is about thousands of Americans, especially people of color, who face bias every day. We need accountability, not just for one officer, but for the system that lets this happen." Her words aired on evening news, were shared across social media, and sparked debates in homes, workplaces, and community centers across California. The trial's aftermath was a whirlwind. Elena's story became a rallying cry for reform. Activists organized marches in Riverside, holding signs that read "Justice for Elena" and "End racial profiling." Community leaders invited her to speak at town halls, where she listened more than she talked. At one event, held in a packed community center, a mother stood up, her voice shaking. "My son's scared to drive at night," she said. "What happened to you could happen to him. What do we do?" Elena met her eyes, her response simple but firm. "We keep speaking up, we document, we demand change, and we don't stop." The room erupted in applause, but Elena felt the weight of their expectations. She wasn't just a survivor of that night. She was a symbol of hope. Elena didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her. She declined most interview requests, wary of her story being sensationalized. Instead, she channeled her energy into advocacy. She met with California lawmakers, presenting a detailed proposal for police reform, mandatory body cameras, stricter penalties for baseless stops, and comprehensive bias training that went beyond surface-level workshops. She drew on her expertise, citing data from her agency's reports. Black drivers were 3 times more likely to be stopped without cause than white drivers in Riverside County. Her presentations were meticulous, blending personal experience with hard evidence, and lawmakers listened. At one hearing in Sacramento, Elena sat before a panel of legislators, her voice steady as she recounted the stop. "I had a gun pointed at my chest for asking a question," she said. "If that can happen to me, with my training and title, what happens to those without a badge? We need laws that protect everyone, not just the privileged." A senator, moved by her testimony, promised to sponsor a bill. Months later, California passed the Accountability in Policing Act. Cameras required, stops audited, officers held accountable. Elena stood at the signing ceremony, her expression determined, not triumphant. The law was a step, not a solution. Back in Riverside, Elena's community rallied around her. Neighbors left notes in her mailbox, thanking her for her courage. Her local coffee shop, a cozy spot where she often worked on weekends, hung a small sign in the window, "We stand with Elena." At her office, colleagues organized a quiet lunch in her honor, where her supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Agent Ruiz, raised a glass. "You didn't just fight for yourself," he said. "You fought for all of us." Elena smiled, but her mind was already on the next battle, training new agents to recognize and challenge bias, mentoring young women of color in law enforcement, and ensuring her agency's policies reflected the change she'd demanded. Elena's personal life, too, felt the impact. Her parents, now retired and living in Arizona, called daily, their pride tinged with worry. "You're doing God's work, baby," her mother said, "but please be careful." Her brother Jamal, now a graphic designer in Oakland, sent her a custom t-shirt with the words "Unshakable" printed in bold. Her best friend, Aisha, a public defender, became her sounding board, listening late into the night as Elena processed the trauma of that night. "You didn't just survive," Aisha told her. "You turned it into something bigger." Elena nodded, but the memories, the flashlight's glare, the gun's cold glint still haunted her dreams. One evening, Elena spoke at a high school in Riverside, invited by a student group focused on social justice. The auditorium was packed with teenagers, their eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. She shared her story, not as a hero, but as someone who'd faced fear and chosen courage. "You don't need a title to stand up," she told them. "You just need to know your worth." A 16-year-old named Kayla approached her afterward, clutching a notebook. "I saw your story on the news," she said shyly. "I want to be like you, but I'm scared." Elena knelt to meet her eyes. "Being scared is okay," she said. "It's what you do with it that matters." Kayla's letter, sent weeks later, now sat framed on Elena's desk. "You showed me I can be brave." Driving home one evening, Elena passed the same stretch of Route 66. The road was quiet, no sirens, just the soft rustle of palm trees and the glow of streetlights. She didn't tense up, didn't check her rearview mirror, but she didn't forget either. Pierce was gone, serving his sentence, but the work wasn't done. She'd keep pushing for justice, for respect, for a system that saw everyone as equal. That was her job, not just as an investigator, but as Elena Carter, a woman who'd faced a gun and walked away stronger. Elena pulled into her riverside driveway, the familiar creak of her garage door, a small comfort after months of carrying the weight of that night. Luna greeted her at the door, weaving between her legs with a soft meow. The trial was over, the reforms underway, but the real victory was in the conversations she'd sparked in classrooms, community centers, and living rooms across California. Elena had learned that standing up wasn't just about winning, it was about showing others they could too. Her story taught young adults, parents, teachers, and everyday folks that respect starts with demanding fairness, even when it's hard. Prejudice thrives in silence, but courage and truth can break it down. Justice isn't a moment, it's a commitment to keep pushing, whether you're an investigator or a kid scared to drive at night. Elena's fight reminded everyone to stay calm, speak up, and hold power accountable, because no one deserves to be judged for who they are. Months after the trial, Elena sat in her backyard, a small oasis with string lights and a fire pit. Aisha was there, sipping iced tea, while Jamal, visiting from Oakland, strummed a guitar. The air was warm, the stars bright overhead. "You changed things, Lena," Jamal said, his voice soft. "Not just for you, but for all of us." Elena looked at the fire, its flames dancing. "I didn't change enough," she said, "but I'm not done." She thought of the kids like Kayla, the mothers at town halls, the grandfather who'd spoken of his grandson's fear. Their stories fueled her, a reminder that her fight was theirs too. Elena returned to her work with renewed purpose, mentoring new agents, refining protocols, and speaking at conferences on systemic reform. She partnered with community organizations, launching workshops on knowing your rights during police encounters. She even started a scholarship fund for young women of color pursuing careers in law enforcement, named after her mother, who taught her to never back down. The fund's first recipient, a 19-year-old from Fontana, wrote Elena a letter that brought tears to her eyes. "You made me believe I belong here." One quiet Sunday, Elena drove to the beach in Santa Monica, needing the ocean's calm. She walked along the shore, the waves lapping at her feet, and thought of that night on Route 66. She'd faced a gun, a man's hatred, and a system that too often failed people like her. But she'd also faced herself, her fear, her strength, her unyielding belief in justice. She picked up a smooth stone, turning it in her hand, and made a silent promise. To keep fighting, to keep teaching, to keep standing up, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting a golden glow across the water, Elena felt a quiet peace. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She'd faced the worst and come out stronger, and she'd carry that strength into every battle still to come.